In Korea, there's a commonly used idiom that goes 강약 약강. 강약 약강. 강 means you are strong, and 약 means you're weak. So 강약 약강 means you are strong against those weaker than you, and you are weak against those stronger than you. In other words, a freaking coward. And I feel like there's a lot of them these days, to be honest. So basically, 강약 약강 is a mentality which describes the tendency to kiss up to those stronger than you while kicking down at those weaker than you. So you're picking on the smaller guy because he's an easy target, but you're running away from the big guys or the more powerful guys because you're scared of them. That is the 강약 약강 mentality. And a lot of people might say, well, that's just nature of humans. That's just the nature of animals. Because if you look at the jungle, a lot of animals try to target the cubs, the smaller animals, while running away from the bigger animals. But this is a little bit different from the food chain in nature, because in nature, everything's about the size and numbers, and they're primarily focused on the survival of the fittest. It's literally about life and death. But what humans do in society is much more intricate and complicated than that. Because the pecking order in society doesn't get sorted out through raw physical power, right? Nowadays, in modern society, what's more important is your status, because your status resembles your power in society. So, for example, your boss might be weaker and smaller than you, but you have to do what you are told, right? You have to do what he says, because that is your employer and you're just an employee getting paid to do that job. Another example would be when you're a staff at Walmart and let's say that a customer asks you a silly question, right? Oh, why are there no longer any strawberry scented shampoos that used to be sold back in the day in 1989? I can't find any of these on the shelves. You can't just tell them to screw off. You got to help the guy, and you have to help him understand that it's 2026. You're giving him customer service because you are a staff of Walmart and your job is to help people out. So no matter how stupid the question is, you have to help the other person find an alternative option, because customer is king, right? And this also works in dating as well. In dating relationships, there is also a pecking order. If you're a man and your woman is constantly disrespecting you and rage baiting you by using all sorts of insults and all sorts of slurs, a low status man with no choice can only accept it and put up with that sort of behavior, while a high status man would have the option to walk away, right? And of course, you can't leave out family relationships between a parent and a child and a parent. So in every relationship, in human society, just like you saw, there's a lot of imbalance of power in various relationships. And usually this imbalance of power causes a lot of drama. It causes a lot of trouble. And what people do is they build up a lot of pent-up anger from these ridiculous work situations and relationship situations in general. And what they do is they take their anger out on those weaker than them. So whether it be their employees, their boyfriends, their girlfriends, children, parents, animals, pets, etc., they displace their anger on other people. And, in psychology, they call this displacement, which is a form of defense mechanism that people tend to use in order to protect their own minds, in order to protect themselves from any harm. But in my worldview, this is the most cowardly, most pathetic, lowest form of human behavior. And you know what's funny? This happens so frequently in Korean society that we made a separate term to describe this action, right? So this action of picking on less threatening targets in order to feel good about myself, in order to feel superior, this action is called 갑질. So remember in the beginning I talked about 강약 약강 mentality? 갑질 is the action itself of picking on the weaker person or, a less threatening person. And 강약 약강 is the mentality behind this 갑질. And, some of you might say that, well, it awfully sounds a lot like bullying. And yeah, it is quite similar to bullying. It is actually bullying, but more accurately, it is bullying done specifically within the grown-up world, using grown-up rules, so to speak. And I'm not sure how much this 갑질 bullying culture is common in other societies, but this is everywhere in our culture, man. It is prevalent, it's omnipresent. From schools to business relationships, from business relationships to romantic relationships to everyday lives, everyone communicates through this one narrow lens of who is on top and who is on bottom. So every time you meet someone new, you're sizing people up, right? Imagine measuring up to a stranger every time you meet someone. But instead of going face to face with them, you are doing this inside your mind. You are constantly trying to look for social cues from that other person that reflect their social status. And what's funny is that all the cliches and all the questions people have about Korean society, all the doubts that people have, herein lies all the answers to the common tropes that get attached to Korean culture. I'll give you some examples. Why are Koreans so obsessed with plastic surgery? And nowadays, it's universally known that Korea is the plastic surgery capital in the entire world. We have the best plastic surgery. We have the most amount of plastic surgery. People even fly into Korea to receive plastic surgery. That's how good the technology is. Why has it become like this? It's such a small country with only an average population. The reason is because beauty puts you in a higher place in the totem pole within Korean society. So the fact that you are mogging people means that you have higher status than the people you just mogged. So you are superior, which means you have the ability to 갑질 other people and not be 갑질ed by others, right? Here's another one. Why are Koreans obsessed with spending so much money on luxury items? And I've mentioned this countless times before of how Korea is the biggest spender on luxury items per capita in the world, right? Why is that? Because it's the same reason. Having logos on your worthless body creates this false idea that you are high status in the eyes of other people. And people agree. People have this consensus that that is true. That is why Koreans even go into debt to buy that luxury bag, to buy that Prada, to buy that Gucci, Hermes, Balenciaga, all that stuff. So, there's a pattern. Do you see this? Why are people driving Rolls Royce and supercars in the streets of Seoul City? If you've ever visited Seoul City, you might have noticed that there are so many fancy cars driving around the streets of Seoul. And I bet you can even find every single supercar in every single color if you really wanted to in a single day. That's how many fancy cars there are in Korea. And the reason is the same as above. people perceive you to be high status just for having high-priced cars. And every single question that you can come up with regarding Korean society can be answered with this single idea of 강약 약강 mentality, the ability to capture, right? So let's take, for example, why does everyone want to live in apartments in Seoul City? Why does everyone want pale skin? Why are Koreans racist against people that are from less developed countries? Why do Koreans want to go to the top universities? Why do K-pop idols have flawless skin and they look flawless and perfect in front of TV? Why do Korean dramas have all the same story of the rich guy loving this average girl fantasy, right? Every single question you can come up with regarding Korean culture and society can be boiled down to this single mentality of wanting to be superior. They want to be up the social hierarchy. Everything, every single decision, every single cliche linked to Korean society is linked to competition, winning the competition, being at the top. 강약 약강, right? People want to mog, man. Korean people want to be superior. They want to have the ability to capture other people. And they don't want to be captured by others. They never want to be captured by others. That is why we go to all these extremes to get out of that bottom position from the totem pole, and they want to climb up. That's why they're going into debt. That's why they're pointing out all these different things. They are using plastic surgery. They're buying stuff that they cannot even afford. They're using everything in their power to get to that top position in society, because that is the position where you will never become captured. You will never get mocked. That is the core mentality. But time and time again, guys, I've been talking about how this isn't just a thing that's happening in Korea. The world, the whole world, is becoming similar to Korea. Ever since Korean culture became mainstream somehow, the whole world is catching up to this idea of mogging, winning the competition, being at the top. Soon, there will be capture. Soon, there will be 강약 약강 mentality. And, you know, it feels almost inevitable, man. I see this happening in the world. I see the change happening, and it's horrible seeing this, to be honest. It really is. You know, society is nowadays slowly shifting into this more shallow and more extremely solipsistic culture, as you might have noticed. And that's actually one of the reasons why I talk about all of this on my channel, right? It's not just, you know, giving motivation or trying to motivate myself or trying to spread positivity, but it's also trying to spread this awareness of what's happening around the world. And, you know, I hope you guys know what's going on and act individually before it's too late, because there's a huge distinction between knowing and anticipating what will happen in the future and not knowing what's going to happen and being oblivious and getting hit by reality later on when it's too late, right? There's a huge distinction. So maybe in another time I will talk about some specific examples of kapjil and what really happens in Korean society, if you guys are interested. So thanks for listening, guys.